Oh,
Bruce.
it's
Hey,
hey,
buddy.
how you doing?
Hey. Well, it took us a half hour to get on because
What's that?
you're 90 years old and your technology is all messed up.
I know some of the other people you've had on this show, and I would have expected those issues from them, but I'm really
No,
embarrassed.
you're actually the worst so far.
Good, as long as I
Bruce,
stand out.
I always have such a great time with you. I love your sense of humor. And fortunately, you happen to be a professional too. Yay! You can actually get the job done too over at Keller Williams Commercial. Tell us what you do real quick, because I haven't worked with you specifically yet, but all I hear is great things about the way you are with people, that always act as a fiduciary, doing right by everybody. And, I think they're probably lying, but, most of what I hear about you is pretty
I've got a
freaking stellar.
got a good side to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm with KW Commercial. We don't like the word Keller Williams because we're kind of snobby commercial brokers. We don't have anything to do with houses, and Keller Williams is a very large residential company, so we use KW Commercial. But you're forgiven, and that's okay. I'm about 21 years in real estate. I started out slumming the houses like you do, and
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't handle the all the carpet and the drapes conversation, about design. It wasn't my thing. I didn't like it, and I was having more fun selling small little investment properties. Made the jump to commercial about 19 years ago, and haven't touched anything with a bed in it since. Business
you know,
wise.
you know what?
So
What cracked me up recently is when you told me about your short stint in residential, where you went door knocking, and then and after one door, you were literally crying. I'll tell you,
I don't
that's
know.
why I don't do door knocking, because it would kill me.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I was knocking on. This was in like 2002, and everybody was saying you got to go door knock. You got to, and so I had an open house in a neighborhood, very nice neighborhood in Larchmont, and the nicer the neighborhood, the less likely people are to open their doors.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out, and walked down one side of the street to invite everyone to my open house the next day, thinking like they had nothing better to do. I mean, there was football and there was church and all that stuff, and I got a couple people open the doors. A couple people yelled at me. I got the quintessential hairy guy in his underwear that said he was busy.
Yeah.
I'm having a party. He didn't invite me in, and when I got to the end of the street, instead of walking back down the other side, knocking on those doors, hi, I'm your friendly neighborhood realtor. I just went back to my car, totally dejected. I don't know if tears actually ran from my eyes, but I
You're
remember
so
it.
like
Just,
crap. At lunch, you told me you cried. You literally used those words. So you're lying now, or you're lying then?
I was probably lying then, but no, I was very dejected. It was hard. So I became probably a lot like you. I became very into meeting people and building relationships, and I do still have to pick up the phone occasionally and talk to strangers, and that's fine. But doing business with people that you know and that you like, and that you can joke around with is way better for me than trying to meet people that don't want to be bothered at home. And that's the good thing about commercial is you're never bothering anyone at home. So I'm mostly an office industrial broker. You asked what I do. I do a lot of leasing, mostly on the tenant side, sometimes on the landlord side, helping them position their buildings to grow the value of their asset, get something ready for sale. The leases and the income statement has everything to do with the value on commercial property.
Sure.
It's not like houses where, hey, that 1,400-foot house sold for this much, so we're going to be this much. Plus, we have a pool, we get to add a little bit. It doesn't work like that in commercial. It's all comes from the financial side.
Sure.
I love putting people into their own properties so they can run their business, have real estate that they can get out of their business at some point and still have an income stream. A lot of tenants don't realize how doable it actually is to buy their own building. Obviously, they have to be profitable and they have to be stable enough to do it. But that's my real passion, is getting people into a position where, hey, if they want to get out of their business in 10 or 20 years, they're going to have that income plus the income from the building and maybe never have to worry about working at all. So
I love it.
So you and I will be talking about getting yourself a building too, because the numbers work.
Ever since I hit 60, I'm thinking like I don't think I'm going to be. I have some rentals, which I love that because I got them like 20 years ago, and rents go up, and properties appreciate, and I'm going like looking at my wife and saying, "Thank goodness we bought real estate." So, but who knows? Maybe once we right now, I'm pretty much being drained by private school, and
which is exactly why you need more real estate that's coming, paying for those schools.
you know what? You're very convincing.
I am. I'm pretty good at that. And I don't sell houses, but wherever your son is going to go to school, you should be looking at maybe buying something there too. So
We're talking about that. In fact, my other son, my younger son, is going up there with his mom right now to see our son who's there, James. And then we're going to start looking into that because first year they need to be in the dorms, but after that they can be out of the dorms. So we're definitely going to do that research.
that's cool.
Yeah. Well, the first reel is going to be called "The Naked Man in His Undies" story. So just so you know how we go, because while I do this with you, I actually put together captions, and then Nico goes and grabs 90-second clips, and he cuts it together. He's really good at that. So the naked man in his undies story.
Well,
Yeah.
he was wearing tighty whities and white socks, and he was like hairy, like look, I don't know if this is appropriate. He was like Middle Eastern hairy, like really hairy, and it was uncomfortable.
Especially when you guys were snuggling. Okay, so
Because he just like opened the door like full on wide. He didn't peek out like he was modest at all. He just swung the door open.
oh my gosh, we know what happened recently, and I know this isn't about me, but one of my team is in the Palisades, and they're shooting this beautiful home near the ocean. And they put the drone up. The drone's going around. They're taking these shots, and we're trying to get shots so that you can see the home and then the ocean in the distance. It's beautiful, right? All of
Yeah.
a sudden, out of nowhere, some guy comes running out of a house naked, screaming, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He's buck naked, and it happens to be a female videographer. She runs in the house, tells my teammate, "I'm so sorry, sir. I swear, we're just shooting the house. We're just shooting the
It
house."
wasn't your client that ran out of the house naked.
Oh
It was
well, there's stories there too, but this isn't about me. This is about
you,
you.
you and your naked stories. Okay.
Yeah. No, I showed up at one property once where literally the person, and I won't mention names because it's a name that you might actually know, not from our group or anything,
No, but you're
but
like
this person
celebrity.
was lying down next to her bed with a shotgun,
Oh.
undressed, and I'm like, I didn't even know what to say. I was floored, and so I ran out of the house and had someone else go in there and make sure she was out of it.
That
So
sounds
anyway,
like an album cover, like a really cool album cover from the 70s.
I like that. I like the way
Yeah.
you're going with it. So tell me another real estate hell story. I mean, something you went through was really freaking challenging. I'm sure you've been through a bunch.
Yeah, it's on the commercial side, we tend to think it's not emotional, but it's money, and money's emotional. So we're not dealing with the husband and wife not agreeing on the view or the yard or the placement of the bathroom, but we're dealing with people's money and their livelihood, and it gets pretty emotional. There's a lot of family trust, probate stuff, but I think the one that threw me for a really big loop. I sold a client a building, a tenant that moved into his own building for the first time, financial services guy. And after we open, as you know, we always pull a property profile. We tend to pull a preliminary title report. We found out after we were in escrow that there was a Liz pendens on this property,
Mm-hmm.
and which is essentially a lawsuit that wasn't recorded on the title, and that says somebody is like throwing their hand up saying, no, you can't sell this property. It turns out the owner of the property was a contractor that had an old partner that he bought out of the business, but the partners somehow thought he was still an owner in the real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So they had their own lawsuit going. And my buyer, in the meantime, has a lease expiring, and he's moving into what we call holdover mode, which is where the landlord says, hey, we'd like you to sign a new 3-year lease. And he's like, I can't, I'm buying a building. Okay, you can stay for 150% of your rent. And so he's paying a lot more. And he had an SBA loan, which takes a long time to close anyway. And then when we finally got the lawsuit cleared, I think the owner of the house, of who I wasn't representing, had to pay off this old employee. We finally
Mm-hmm.
got it cleared by a judge. Turns out the owner had an SBA loan, but it's a special type of SBA loan. You can only pay it off during one 12-hour period a month. It
What?
sounds like a joke. It's like the third Thursday during business hours is the only
Mhm.
time that they accept payoffs, and they missed it. So we had to wait another month for it. And it was more about like, how are we going to get the guy in? Where's he going to stay? I ended up putting him up in our real estate office. He rented a couple offices from us while we waited for that to close. He's thrilled now. I mean, based on, I think he bought it about 6 years ago, and based on what he bought it for, he's made a lot of money, and he's running his practice in this building, and it looks great. And we go through these really difficult times, and no real estate transaction is fun per se, I don't think. But when you get through it all and you look back, it's never as bad as it feels. But like the sky was falling when you find out I'm in my first lawsuit in 20 years, and I'm not even a party to the lawsuit, but I'm having to deal with everything about it. So that sucked.
Yeah,
But
I thought Independence was a Broadway musical.
lay, that's lay that's yeah
Latest?
lay that's lay pendant.
Okay, it's totally different. Okay, that's different. All right, so what else you got? So you've got,
Uh,
but I do
oh, you
find
want
that,
my crappy stories?
yeah, yeah.
Let's see another crappy story. Okay, here's a good story. Here's a crappy story. I mean, I don't have any like raccoon in the wall, rats in the wall stories like most of your
No,
guests
that's
probably have. Women in bed with shotguns. I can't match you there because I'm not doing places where people live. But I had one buyer martial arts sort of studio, a tenant, and we put them in a building, and there's zoning. Everyone knows about zoning, but there's
hmm
also something called a use code on every single property, whether it's a house or not. Now, your house is probably zoned R1 or SFR1, which is for a single
hmm
family home. And then it probably has a use code next to it that says single family residence. But
hmm
we all know about like preschools that are in neighborhoods and things like that. Those might say single family zoning, but then the use code might say daycare or preschool. Well,
Right.
when you're in the retail world and you're doing retail business, all of those retailers have a different use code. So your hair salon gets lumped in with your massage parlors. I'm sure you're very familiar with a bunch of those, and your nail salons and things like that. Your fitness centers, those are a different kind of use code. Anything where you're doing assembly or classroom, a church, all different use codes. And I have a tenant that came in with a martial arts studio. They were pretty well known, and the husband was like a world champion in this particular type of martial arts and had a big following. And they found this great space, used to be a carpet and flooring
hmm
showroom warehouse. And they went in and I told them all of the things. I have a disclosure and I counsel them on all this. And they didn't seem that worried about the fact that there wasn't enough parking there for what I think they needed to do. And they went ahead and they built it out, and they spent thousands of dollars rearranging the bathrooms. They did everything without permit. Um, and they never went in and applied for a use code change because they wouldn't have got a use code change because they would have needed 35 parking spaces for the size of the facility, and there were about 15 there. So about 8 months later, I get a call from her. She's panicked, and I didn't know any of this at the time. And she's like, the city red tagged me. So the city actually put a red tag on the door, gave her 30 days, said you're operating with an illegal use in this facility. You
hmm
cannot get a use code change in this particular city in 30 days. So they basically said you have 30 days to find 30 parking spaces. Turns out one of her students that had left and on less than good terms with her, lived
hmm
on the street that they were on, and the street got, because the parking lot was so small, the street got very busy with parking. And so, as an ex disgruntled student, he was now a current disgruntled neighbor, and he
Oh,
called the city and said they don't have the parking. They're running big events, and they don't have the parking. And she got called out, and it made me. It's one of the reasons I don't like to do retail. Is every deal has hair on it. They're
mhm.
all different. They all require different use changes. Anything that becomes something that it wasn't before requires a process through the city. So anything that becomes a restaurant or was a restaurant and becomes something else or has any sort of
Right.
medical component or anything where someone's touching you is a very different kind of use code, and it requires, sometimes the city will require you to upgrade the parking lot or the ramps to make them a little bit more current, and
Mhm.
they can be big cans of worms. So that's why it's one of the reasons I focus in the office and in the industrial world is when something is zoned and use coded office or zoned and use coded industrial,
Right.
we typically don't change them that much.
A lot more
Um,
straightforward. Was there a
yeah,
big, was one the big karate fight at the end where everyone is throwing punches and stuff to settle this? Is that how it wrapped up?
she was able to run like a block away and find a hardware style store that had a giant parking lot. She was able to lease 30 parking spaces from them, and
Smart.
she survived. Okay, now at the end of their lease, they moved on anyway. Luckily, I had my disclosure signed because she was ready to sue me for the entire thing because I didn't tell her this, even though it was we had a conversation like this, not over Zoom at the time, and she
Mhm.
signed an agreement that I told her about this and she needs to check with the city, dotted all my I's, crossed all my T's, and I was fine. But she luckily found those parking spaces. However, when you find parking spaces in another location, the city can do a parking audit and now verify that the other location, so the hardware store, still kept exclusive use of enough spaces to meet their needs. Right? Cities
Yeah.
don't want you overflowing onto residential streets and pissing off the neighbors, basically. So yeah, so that was a icky one, and I never liked him anyway, so I didn't want to work with him again. So that worked out okay.
Yeah. I
No
vouch.
punches.
Yes. I was expecting there was going to be some sort of crane move, some sort of, this is my.
Oh yeah, luckily not because I'm not. I'm a lover, not a fighter, Scott.
Hmm. I know that. I know that. Hey, so we heard that in the first story with the guy in the tidy whities. So another story. So that one's called Martial Arts Studio, no permits. Uh,
Let's see what else we got.
yeah, you give me one more because then we're gonna
Oh,
have to.
here's a good one.
No,
Here's a
we're
good
gonna
one.
a lot of good stuff already. It's fun. The only thing is
I had
missing.
a client I had a client. Very rarely will I go outside of my area of expertise geographically because it's just I hate the freeways here in LA. But I was helping a real estate office,
Mhm.
friends of mine through a company that you know well, and they were looking to open up in the Santa Clarita Valley. And first we do a little preview online. We set up showings, and so a lot of times in commercial, the owner's never there. Sometimes the other agent's there. Sometimes it's a lockbox or
Mhm.
hey, the key's up on top of the thing. But we went to look at a space in a strip center. It's like one of those 2-story kind of retail on the bottom, office on top. Pretty
Sure.
nice on a very busy street. And we walked in, and I don't know if you've ever opened up a fresh bag of marijuana and stuck your face in it, Scott, but that's what it smelled like. It was a cannabis grow house that
Mm.
had been raided by the police, and the tenant left. And as we're walking through, first of all, there's no drywall. They put up this reflective um, stuff so there's light like 24/7. There's mud on the ground. There's like branches of plants all over the ground, fertilizer, the whole place. Like it just reeks so bad. And it was embarrassing that I didn't know that before I walked in with my clients because it was a little funny, a little shocking, but it was horrible, and it would have taken multiple six figures to clean this space out. And the owner apparently didn't have much knowledge of what it was and what had happened. But that was kind of interesting to walk through. That was before that it became legal, and it's you don't want to be next door to one. Let's put it that way. Definitely, they're very pungent, and when they've been there and they were growing there, they're much more pungent than when it's just a store that's selling the packaged stuff. So that was interesting. Needless to say, we passed on that one and moved on to others. But again, yeah, I don't. I wish I had like I walked in on a you know an underground crime ring, a gambling or place
Mhm.
after. I don't have anything like
Okay,
super
there's still
super
you can always
exciting.
you can always come back when it.
Here's a financial one for you. There was a CPA firm that I was working with, and or attorneys. They were tax attorneys, and they brought me in because their lease was coming due, and their landlord had died a few years before, and the guy's son had taken over. Landlord was in his 90s
Mhm.
when he died, and they had me look at their lease. And I do a lot of that where I'll go back and verify leases are, accurate and what they're paying. Well, there's a clause in there. Most tenants don't realize that as the property taxes and insurance increase on a building, they pay that. 99% of the time in a commercial lease, they pay that. Residentially, we don't pass anything through to a tenant. They pay the utilities, but your roof blows off, you have an insurance deductible, your insurance goes up, your taxes go up. You don't get to recover that. In the commercial world, we do, whether it's a net or a gross lease. But here's a landlord that had the right to recover a lot of this. This tenant had been there for 20 years and they had never, ever given him an invoice for these pass throughs. So, just to give you an idea, they were there for 20 years. 1 year of the pass throughs was $17,000 to this tenant. And so the son kind of woke up a little bit to what was going on, gave them a bill for $17,000 and kind of ignored the previous 19 years, which would have probably been about 200,000. And luckily we were able to kind of move them on before he realized that he never billed them that. And it turns out that the statute of limitations on that is not short. All the attorneys I talked to were like, oh yeah, he can come back for that. I mean, a judge would say, look, you got to set up a payment plan, but this guy's rent was like $9,000 a month, and he got a bill from the landlord for $17,000. And he said, what do I do? And I said, well, pay it and let's get you the heck out of this building, because when he finds out to go get the other ones, it could be very, very drastic. Yeah, I step into situations where tenants don't know what they've signed, and the broker they worked with didn't explain it to them. So the worst thing is, just like in residential, and it's not necessarily bad there, but somebody walks into a house they love and they feel like they want to work with the listing agent because maybe they'll get a better deal. Tenants feel like they have to pay us as tenant rep brokers, and they generally don't. And so if they go to the listing agent directly and there's a savings to be had, it's not going to go to the tenant. It's going to go to the owner, or the listing agent's going to double end it. But they don't have a fiduciary responsibility, and they're not explaining everything. And even attorneys, they're the worst. Attorneys will step into deals. They have no idea what they're stepping into. They think they know what they're reading, and it's not their area of law. And all of a sudden, I look at it later and I'm like, who did this lease for you? Oh, I did it myself. It's like, oh, asshole. No, there's a lot in leases. What we have to realize is that commercial landlords do nothing but lease space and deal with their buildings, and that's what they do for a living. Whereas whatever the tenant does is not that. They're an insurance agent or an attorney or a CPA, and there is so much in a lease. I mean, these leases I'm doing are 100 pages long. They have to know what's in there, and you really need somebody to explain that, because there are things in leases that people don't realize are in leases. And COVID was a great example of finding out what really was in a lease, when everybody wanted to give up their lease because the government said you can't go to work. And there's a clause in most leases that says if the building is uninhabitable, the tenant can break the lease or not pay rent. Well, during COVID, some of our places were considered uninhabitable because the government wouldn't let you go to work, but some businesses were considered essential and they got to go to work. And landlords found ways to keep their buildings open and essentially tell tenants, no. There's no one standing outside with a gun not letting you in. And a lot of people got burned when their businesses either failed or everybody went home to work during COVID. And we've all adjusted to that now. And because of that, the office market is a little bit, it shrunk as far as the demand goes. And there's not a lot of new product coming out because people downsized or they gave up their offices altogether.
Hey, so Bruce, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, Scott, I'm sorry I couldn't get my technology working. Hopefully this worked out. I feel short again.
It did. It worked out just fine because really all we needed was 20 to 30 minutes anyway, and so we just used the last half hour instead of the first. So it worked out great.
There you go.